Stay alert. You are standing at the lip of a turning point, and once it breaks open, your life will not return to its previous shape. Something is moving beneath the visible layer now, quietly, precisely, with the kind of force that does not ask for permission. Tomorrow's Mercury-Jupiter contact is not background energy. It is a live threshold. A brief window is opening, and it carries information, pressure, and timing all at once. Most people will scroll past it. They will call it coincidence, mood, imagination, a passing wave. Let them. What is arriving was never meant for the distracted. It is meant for the ones who can feel when the atmosphere changes before the world has language for why. That change has already begun. There is a signal rising through your life right now. Not loudly, not theatrically, but with unmistakable precision. A pattern is surfacing. A truth is stepping out of shadow. A detail you could once avoid is now moving straight into view. And once it locks into place, you will understand why certain doors closed, why certain desires refused to die, why your spirit has felt both restless and watchful at the same time. This is the hour to pay attention. Not later. Not when the proof becomes convenient. Now. Because this kind of opening does not stay wide for long. It asks for presence. It asks for discernment. And, above all, it asks for response. So steady yourself. Clear the static. Watch what repeats. Watch what returns. Watch what suddenly feels charged. What is being revealed is not random. It is a summons. And if you meet it clean, awake, and without hesitation, this moment will mark the line between the life you managed and the life you were actually called to enter, fully. We are entering a stretch of time where the signal gets louder, not outside you, but within the pattern of your own life. Something is beginning to come into focus now. And it is not small. It is the thread of what comes next. Not a random mood, not a passing fixation, not some spiritual language you entertain for a night and forget. This is the emergence of your next era, and it does not arrive with a headline. It arrives the way real things arrive, through repetition, through pressure, through a new standard rising in you that makes your old way of living feel too narrow to continue. Pay attention to what has been following you. Pay attention to what keeps returning after you have tried to dismiss it. A new direction rarely announces itself. It leaks through the cracks first. It shows up in what grips your imagination for no obvious reason. It appears in the question that keeps circling back when the room is quiet. It appears in the version of yourself you can suddenly see with clarity, even if you have not yet become them in visible form. This is how the timeline gets marked. This is how the unseen places a hand on the shoulder of the seen and says, "Here, this is where the story bends." Do not underestimate that moment. Recognition is never the whole event. Recognition is the ignition point. Once the theme reveals itself, the pressure increases, choices sharpen. The old camouflage stops working. What begins here is not just insight, it is momentum, and momentum has consequences. There are seasons when life feels stalled, blurred, unformed. Then there are brief openings like this, where everything starts arranging itself around a truth that can no longer be postponed. You are not meant to stand at that threshold half awake. You are meant to meet it with precision. There may be relief in this for you, and not the soft kind, the clarifying kind, the kind that arrives when confusion finally loses its authority. Because one of the deepest changes in this passage is that your life stops looking scattered. The fragments begin to reveal their order. Events that once seemed disconnected start linking together with unnerving coherence. You begin to see that what looked like chaos was often choreography you did not yet have the altitude to perceive. The pieces were never random. Your vantage point was simply too close to the wall to recognize the mural. That shift changes everything. You stop asking why so many things seem to break at the worst possible time, and you start seeing what those breakages made room for. You stop treating every disappointment as punishment and begin reading it as rerouting. The bond that collapsed was not only a loss, It was a severing from a version of intimacy too small for who you are becoming. The chance that slipped through your hands did not only close a door, it cleared space for work, connection, or purpose that matches your actual trajectory. Even the delays that once felt cruel begin to look exact. Exact in timing, exact in pressure, exact in what they carved out of you. This is what happens when perspective matures. You begin to read your life in themes instead of incidents. And once that deeper reading clicks into place, it becomes almost impossible to go back to the old interpretation. You cannot unlearn the intelligence in the sequence. You cannot keep calling yourself unlucky once you start seeing how many detours were instructions in disguise. You cannot keep shrinking your story into isolated disappointments once the larger architecture steps forward and names itself. And when that architecture becomes visible, something dormant within you begins to stir. Not a performance, not a fantasy, something older, something truer, a buried faculty of perception, a steadier center, a part of you that has been waiting not for permission, but for context. Because some parts of the self do not awaken through desire alone. They awaken when reality finally arranges itself in a way that makes their existence undeniable. They awaken when the pattern becomes legible. So do not rush past what is surfacing now. Do not call it coincidence because it arrived quietly. Some of the most decisive turns in a life begin as a whisper that will not leave. Stay near what feels charged. Stay near what repeats. Stay near what widens your inner horizon, even if it also unsettles you. This window is not opening so you can admire it. It is opening so you can move, and if you honor what is being shown now, you will not just understand the next chapter. You will enter it changed. There is a moment in certain cycles when the soul stops speaking in hints and begins speaking in form. This Mercury-Jupiter trine carries that kind of moment. It does not merely inspire you. It identifies you. It brings forward an inner design that has been present your entire life, but too deep, too quiet, or too inconvenient for the surface mind to name. What rises now is not a mood, not a fantasy, not a borrowed aesthetic. It is the living pattern of who you are when you are no longer contorting yourself to survive spaces that were never built for your real nature. Every person moves through the world with a native configuration of energy, a way of meeting life that is older than personality and more enduring than roles. It is not your resume. It is not the mask you learn to wear to be accepted. It is not the performance that earned you approval. It is the inner stance your spirit takes when it is aligned, unhidden, and unafraid. Some people spend decades orbiting that truth without ever fully entering it. They feel its pull in fragments, in instincts, in strange moments of clarity, but they keep translating it into safer language, so they do. It brings the deeper pattern too close to ignore. That is why this period can feel unnerving and exact. You are not being handed a new identity. You are being confronted by one that has been quietly organizing your life from behind the curtain. It does not always arrive with thunder, declarations, or some cinematic event. More often, it enters like recognition. You picture yourself stepping into a path you have never outwardly claimed, and something in you goes still because it feels less like imagination and more like memory. You hear a description of a life you have not yet lived, and instead of resistance, you feel an ancient familiarity. You start understanding why certain themes have followed you, why certain trials kept repeating, why certain rooms left you depleted while others made you feel alive. This is how the archetype comes forward, not as costume, but as truth. It reveals itself through what you can hold without strain, through the responsibilities that seem to choose you, through the forms of service, leadership, protection, creation, discernment, or vision that feel less like effort and more like direct current. You begin seeing that your life has always bent toward a particular mode of expression. Not because fate is theatrical, but because essence is consistent. What has looked like contradiction in you may actually be coherence you had not yet learned to read. For some, this emergence carries the frequency of the stabilizer, the one whose presence lowers the temperature in the room and gives other people access to their own breath again. For others, it comes as the deep reader, the one who can hear what is underneath language and sense the real movement beneath appearances. For others, it arrives as the trail cutter, the one built to move first, to enter unknown territory, to break inherited patterns without asking to be understood on the way. And for many, it is not one clean category at all. It is a braid, a blend, vision with tenderness, strength with interpretation, precision with mercy. The point is not the label. The point is the shape of your energy when it is no longer fragmented. This transit sharpens your perception of that shape with unusual force. Suddenly, things that once confused you begin to sort themselves into meaning. You understand why some obligations feel almost holy while others feel like erosion. You understand why certain environments flatten you, why some social dynamics leave static in your nervous system, why being misunderstood by certain people has always carried a familiar ache. You begin to see that the pull you have felt towards specific kinds of work, risk, responsibility, or devotion was never random hunger. It was orientation. It was the deeper self attempting to guide the visible self toward the life that could actually hold it. And here is where the window opens wider. Once this archetypal center starts becoming conscious, your standards change. Quietly, then, all at once. You move differently because you are no longer negotiating with every room for permission to be yourself. You speak differently because your words begin coming from a rooted place. You decide differently because confusion loses some of its power when identity gains substance. Even your tolerance changes. What you once endured to keep the peace starts feeling spiritually expensive. What you once called patience may reveal itself as self-abandonment. What you once called realism may expose itself as fear in respectable clothing. The archetype does not just comfort you, it corrects your trajectory. That is why this phase should be treated with seriousness. When the inner pattern becomes visible, life begins reorganizing around it. Relationships get measured against it. Work gets measured against it. Habits, obligations, ambitions, and even your private fantasies get measured against it. Anything that requires you to betray your deeper design begins to feel louder, heavier, harder to justify. Anything that nourishes that design starts carrying charge, not sentimentality. Charge. This is not a daydream. It is a reveal. So if something in you has been stirring lately, do not dismiss it because it arrived without applause. Do not minimize it because it does not fit the script you were handed. Stay close to what feels quietly inevitable. Stay close to the roles that feel less invented than remembered. Stay close to the callings that make your body straighten and your spirit sharpen. What is stepping forward now is not a persona you need to construct. It is the buried authority of your own nature. Let it rise. Let it instruct your next move. Let it become the compass that separates the life you merely maintained from the life you were built to inhabit. This Mercury-Jupiter trine does not heighten intuition in the way most people expect. It does not arrive as panic. It does not arrive as emotional noise, spiritual drama, or some urgent inner alarm demanding that you drop everything and run. It arrives with far more force than that. It arrives as pattern, as proportion, as sudden internal order. What changes now is not the volume of your intuition, but its range. It stops speaking only to the next decision, the next discomfort, the next emotional flare-up, and begins speaking to the larger design of your life. That is what makes this window rare. Your inner knowing starts widening beyond the immediate scene. Instead of circling temporary fears, it begins tracking long arcs. Instead of fixating on who texted back, who misunderstood you, what feels unstable this week, or what discomfort needs to be soothed by tonight, your perception starts lifting above the static. You begin seeing how one decision touches 3 others, how one conversation opens a corridor, how one refusal protects an entire future. Timing stops looking random. It starts revealing layers. This is not intuition as a tremor. This is intuition as architecture. You start recognizing that every choice carries a sequence inside it. not just a consequence, but a chain, a rhythm, a direction. One path drains you slowly, even if it flatters your ego in the moment. Another path demands more courage up front, but it builds something durable beneath your feet. During this transit, that difference becomes clearer. Your instincts stop operating like warning lights and start operating like an internal navigation system. They do not only tell you what is off, they begin showing you what leads somewhere. That distinction matters. A lot of people are trained to use intuition only defensively, to sense danger, to avoid pain, to retreat from what feels wrong. But this passage upgrades the function entirely. Now your inner guidance is not just protecting you from misalignment. It is positioning you for construction. It starts revealing what deserves your energy, what deserves your discipline, what deserves your long game. You are not merely sensing what to escape. You are being shown what to build. Mercury is part of why this becomes usable instead of abstract. The insight does not remain buried in feeling. It becomes legible. Thought begins translating what spirit has already perceived. Ideas come in with an unusual cleanliness. Decisions arrive with a maturity that feels ahead of your current circumstances. You may catch yourself thinking with a kind of calm precision that seems to belong to a version of you already standing farther down the road. That is not fantasy. That is alignment. And once that alignment begins, hesitation loses ground. You stop reacting to every wave and start reading the tide. You stop mistaking intensity for truth. You stop confusing urgency with guidance. Your direction becomes less theatrical and more exact, cleaner, sharper, harder to argue with. So pay close attention to the thoughts that arrive with structure. Pay attention to what makes sense in layers, not just in moods. Pay attention to the option that does not merely soothe you, but organizes you. Because in this transit, intuition is no longer a whisper in the dark. It is a map unfolding. And if you trust what it shows you now, you will move with a level of precision that changes more than the moment. It changes the road. What emerges here is more than sensitivity. It is strategic sight, a knowing that lets you choose with foresight, move without fog, and recognize destiny unfolding. Before we go any further, this needs to be said plainly. One of the loneliest parts of transformation is being seen through an outdated lens. Few things cut deeper than feeling the shift happen inside you while the world keeps speaking to a version of you that no longer exists. That tension is real. It is not vanity. It is not impatience. It is the friction that appears when your inner reality has already moved, but external recognition is still lagging behind. Real growth is almost never loud at first. It does not always announce itself with visible milestones or dramatic declarations. It begins in private. In the choices you no longer make, in the reactions you no longer feed, in the boundaries you finally stop apologizing for, in the standards that rise without needing permission. The change happens in the unseen chamber first, in thought, in self-respect, in restraint, in discernment. And because that evolution begins below the surface, the people around you often keep addressing the familiar outline, the older pattern, the person they learned how to predict. That can feel brutal. But do not let it confuse you. Their delayed perception does not cancel your becoming. It only reveals how long it takes for the outer world to catch up with an inner shift that has already taken place. Most people update their image of you slowly because they are relating to memory, not revelation. They are responding to the last version of you that made sense to them. So, do not shrink just because your transformation has not yet been properly witnessed. Do not perform your old self to make other people comfortable with their stale assumptions. Hold your ground. Let the new posture stabilize. Let the new mind deepen. Let the new rhythm become natural enough that it no longer asks to be believed. In time, what is now invisible will become undeniable. Honor the shift before anyone else learns to fully, because eventually the evidence speaks. Not through argument, but through pattern, through the way you carry yourself, through what you accept and what you refuse, through the calm in your decisions, through the life that begins to form around the person you have become. And when that happens, the past loses its authority. Thank you for speaking that truth out loud. A lot of people feel it. Few know how to name it. This phase of the transit does not merely hand you courage, ambition, or a temporary surge of belief. It activates something far more useful than that. It awakens the faculty within you that reads patterns before outcomes arrive. The part of you that can sense timing, detect alignment, and understand that one measured move made now can alter the shape of the next several months. This is not about becoming louder in your desires. It is about becoming cleaner in your perception. There are moments in life when you are asked to expand. This is not one of them. This is a moment to sharpen, to refine, to see with greater exactness where energy is leaking, where opportunity is forming, and where the hidden connection points have been sitting in plain sight, waiting for you to notice them. Mercury begins working like an internal analyst, but one guided by something deeper than logic alone. It starts linking pieces of your life that once felt separate. A door that closed before you understood why. Then Jupiter widens the field. It does not just make you hopeful. It gives altitude. Suddenly, the path in front of you is not a flat decision between yes and no, stay or go, hold or release. It becomes a landscape. You begin to see where each option actually leads, what each direction demands, and which route carries real future weight. This is why choices during this window can feel unusually charged. Not dramatic, charged, because you are no longer responding to surface appearances. You are reading consequences, momentum, and sequence. That shift changes the way you move. Options begin appearing in places you overlooked before, not because they were absent, but because your vision was still organized around survival. Survival sees what is urgent. Strategy sees what is useful. Survival asks how to get through the week. Strategy asks what decision made today will still be paying you back 6 months from now. Under this transit, that strategic intelligence begins rising from within. You start seeing how your experience, your instincts, your relationships, even the difficulties you resented, have been quietly positioning you for more than you realized. You also begin to notice that not every invitation is an opening, not every delay is a denial, and not every loss is a setback. Some things are distractions wearing the costume of opportunity. Some things are tests of discernment. This transit helps you tell the difference. It teaches you to stop chasing movement for its own sake and start honoring direction with steadier, more deliberate power behind it. And once that realization lands, your decision-making changes texture. You begin anticipating reactions before they happen. You read rooms better. You sense when to advance, when to wait, when to speak plainly, and when silence carries more power. Your choices feel both bold and exact, as if instinct and intellect have finally stopped competing and started collaborating. That union is rare, but when it happens, life stops feeling like something you endure and starts feeling like something you can navigate with intent. This is the awakening of strategy, the moment when your choices stop being emotional reflexes and start becoming deliberate placement. You are no longer just recognizing the next opening, you are preparing to use it. And that changes everything, because when this part of you comes online, the next opportunity will not merely be seen, it will be positioned, claimed, and turned into forward motion. One of the quieter powers of the Mercury-Jupiter trine is that it narrows the distance between the self you are inhabiting now and the self you have been growing toward. Not the fantasy version, not the inflated version, the real one. The one with steadier judgment, deeper timing, cleaner discernment. Mercury governs the mind you use in the present tense, the voice in your head, the language of your reasoning, the way you process what is happening right now. Jupiter governs expansion, perspective, and the version of you that can already see farther than your current circumstances allow. When these two forces come into harmony, a rare passage opens. The mind you have today starts receiving the posture of the self you have not fully become yet. This is why the shift can feel so unusual. It does not arrive like outside instruction. It does not feel like advice descending from somewhere beyond you. It feels more intimate than that, and more unsettling. Thoughts begin appearing that seem ahead of schedule. Ideas enter with a level of maturity that does not match the visible conditions of your life. Yet they feel strangely native to you. You may notice yourself thinking from a place that appears untouched by your current limitations, not because your limitations are gone, but because something in you is no longer taking them as the final authority. During this window, you may feel drawn toward decisions, standards, or directions that belong to a larger life than the one you have fully built. The pull can be difficult to explain. It may seem disproportionate to what is happening on the surface, but the force behind it is real. You are beginning to think with the orientation of the person you are becoming, not just the habits of the person you have been. That changes the emotional texture of everything. Choices that used to exhaust you with endless loops of overthinking may suddenly become simple. Not easy, but clear. You start sensing the long arc behind them. You can feel what each path becomes if you stay with it long enough. That is the bridge this transit forms. It is not symbolic only. It is functional. The future self begins communicating through readiness, through perspective, through a calm intelligence that enters before external proof arrives. You wake up with an understanding that seems to have no obvious source. A certain move feels timely, even if nothing around you is confirming it yet. A plan begins taking shape with unusual coherence. You notice that your thoughts are no longer obsessed with immediate validation. They are organizing around durability, consequence, and design. Something in you has started looking farther down the road, and that can be disorienting, because this kind of clarity rarely matches your present environment right away. Your current life may still look unfinished, transitional. The evidence around you may lag behind the knowing within you, but this transit is not asking you to wait until your outer reality catches up before trusting what has begun. It is asking you to recognize that inner preparedness often arrives first. The psyche is being introduced to a larger identity before the world has visible language for it. In that sense, what you are feeling is not fantasy. It is rehearsal with consequences. You are not receiving random flashes of insight. You are coming into alignment with a deeper intelligence that already understands the terrain ahead. The self you are moving toward is not vague. It carries memory from the future in the form of instinct, restraint, and strategic calm. That is why this phase can bring a kind of confidence that does not need noise. A confidence without performance. A confidence that does not shout that everything is solved, but knows with steadiness that the path will reveal itself as you walk it. It says, keep moving. The structure is forming. You are not late. This is why the transit can feel like a shift in identity before it feels like a breakthrough in circumstance. It is not only giving you better thoughts, it is giving you access to a more advanced version of your own interior, a wiser rhythm, a higher vantage point, a clearer relationship to time, effort, and direction. You are, in a sense, feeling tomorrow's self enter today's mind. Treat that seriously. Stay close to the thoughts that arrive with calm precision. Stay close to the decisions that carry long-range coherence. Stay close to the life that feels larger than your current evidence, but truer than your old narrative. This bridge is open for a reason. Cross it while the signal is strong, because once this line between present identity and future identity becomes active, something buried even deeper begins to stir, waiting for its own return. Every person enters this world carrying a signal that appears early, not always loudly, not always in a way others recognize. A way of building, sensing, arranging, healing, reading, speaking, creating, or understanding that seems almost too easy to matter. In childhood, it often shows up before self-consciousness has a chance to interfere. It appears in the thing you do instinctively, the thing you return to without being told, the thing that makes time loosen its grip. And because it arrives so naturally, It is often mistaken for something ordinary, something small, something unserious. But what comes easily is not always small. Sometimes it is ancient. Sometimes it is the earliest evidence of what your life was built to carry. The problem is that very few people are taught how to recognize this kind of gift. The world tends to honor what is measurable, marketable, immediate, and easy to explain. So the deeper aptitude, the stranger intelligence, the more intuitive form of knowing, often gets renamed before it has the chance to develop. It gets called a phase, a side interest, a childish obsession, a little talent with no real future. And over time, especially as life gets louder and more demanding, that early gift is pushed to the margins, not erased, not destroyed, just buried under deadlines, survival, practicality, disappointment, and the constant pressure to become someone legible to other people. That burial creates a particular kind of sadness. Not always conscious, not always dramatic, but it lives in the body as a sense that something essential has been deferred, a quiet awareness that there is a part of you you once knew how to access, but no longer visit with the same trust. You may not even miss it directly. You may only feel the consequences of its absence. The flatness that follows achievement. The strange boredom that appears in a life that looks functional on paper. The ache of being capable while still feeling underused in some deeper way. That is often the signature of a buried gift. It does not vanish. It waits. And this Mercury-Jupiter trine has a way of disturbing the ground above what has been waiting. Not with chaos, with timing, with precision, with the kind of pressure that makes hidden things relevant again. What begins resurfacing now is not some theatrical awakening designed to impress you. It is subtler and more consequential than that. It is the quiet return of something that belonged to you long before the world taught you what to value. A faculty you had, a style of perception, an original strength, a way of touching reality that you may have dismissed precisely because it felt so natural. This return rarely announces itself as destiny. It comes in sideways, through a conversation that reactivates an old interest, through a memory that suddenly carries weight, through a chance opportunity that stirs a skill you have not used in years, through a renewed hunger for something you thought you had outgrown. You find yourself circling back to an old language, an old method, an old fascination. And this time, it does not feel nostalgic. It feels charged. It feels timely. It feels as if what once belonged to the past is now presenting itself as unfinished business with a future attached to it. That difference matters. Because nostalgia looks backward for comfort. Alignment returns something from the past because it has become useful to the future. Under this transit, the gift does not come back so you can admire who you used to be. It comes back because who you are becoming finally has a use for it. The context has changed. The stakes have changed. Your level of readiness has changed. What once seemed incidental now reveals itself as structural. What you once treated like a side note begins to look more like a foundation stone. Maybe it was the way you could read people before they spoke the full truth. Maybe it was the way you solved problems by seeing links other people missed. Maybe it was the way your mind organized beauty, language, systems, images, emotions, or ideas with unusual ease. Maybe it was the way you could sense the undercurrent in a room, intuit the missing piece in a conversation, or make something coherent out of fragments. Whatever form it took, it was never random, and it was never wasted. Even if it went unused in obvious ways, it was shaping you. Quietly. Preparing your nervous system, your perception, your instincts for a season that would require exactly that way of knowing. That is why this reemergence can feel almost unsettling. You start realizing that something you discounted may have been one of the most central threads in your design. Not because it was flashy, because it was true, because it carried your signature. Thanks for watching, and we have liked this video. because it reflected a way your inner world touches the outer one with minimal distortion. And once that realization lands, regret may try to surface. Regret for the years you left it untouched. Regret for the times you let other people define what counted. Regret for the choices made under pressure that pulled you away from what was alive in you. But this transit is not asking you to worship regret. It is asking you to recover function. The gift returns now because now is when it can be integrated, not idolized, not romanticized, used. This is less about talent than it is about alignment. A buried ability becomes visible at the exact moment your life is mature enough to recognize its purpose. You are not reconnecting with a cute relic from your younger self. You are being reintroduced to a tool that your next chapter may depend on. Something intimate, something precise, something that was ahead of its time when it first appeared, and is only now finding the conditions that can hold it properly. That is why the return carries strategic weight. It may come with emotion, yes, but beneath the feeling is structure. You begin seeing how this forgotten capacity fits into the larger architecture now forming around you. It fills a gap you could not name before. It answers a need you had been trying to solve indirectly. It clarifies why certain paths never fully satisfied you. They may have been respectable, they may have been productive, but they did not recruit your original current. They did not call forward the deeper intelligence that is uniquely yours to bring. So pay attention to what is resurfacing. Do not dismiss it because it arrives quietly. Do not minimize it because it feels familiar. Sometimes the most important thing returning to your life will not look dramatic at first. It will look obvious. It will look like something you almost overlooked again. But if it keeps appearing, if it keeps pulling at your attention with that calm but undeniable force, treat it with reverence, not sentimentality. Reverence, because this may be the moment when what you once abandoned stops being memory and starts becoming mission. And once that happens, life begins illuminating the background differently. Hidden relevance comes forward. Deferred meaning becomes visible. You start noticing that nothing essential was ever truly gone. It was waiting for the hour when you would be ready to stop apologizing for your own design. This is that hour. The signal is back. The gift is not returning to decorate your story. It is returning to unlock it. Do not wait for total certainty before responding to it. Total certainty is rarely granted at the beginning of a realignment like this. What you are given first is resonance. A tightening of focus, a sense that something old is no longer old at all, but active, present, and asking for embodiment. The window opens when recognition meets willingness. That means the next step may be simple, but it must be real. Name it again. Make room for it in your calendar, your attention, your standards. Let it interrupt the false order of a life built only around necessity. Let it prove that what is authentic in you still has authority. Because once this gift is welcomed back, it changes more than your sense of self. It changes your decisions. It changes the rooms you enter, the work you accept, the collaborations you allow, the future you consider believable. It changes what you call possible. The return of a buried gift is never only personal. It rearranges the path around it. It alters trajectory. It exposes where you have been living beneath your own range. And if you honor it now, while this opening is live, you will not just recover a lost part of yourself. You will recover direction. What returns is not a souvenir from the past. It is a key with weight, and the door it opens will not stay unlocked. Step toward it while signal is clear. One of the more unsettling gifts of the Mercury-Jupiter trine is this. Truth can reach you through mouths you would never think to trust with revelation. It does not always arrive through the wise friend, the seasoned guide, the healer, the mentor, or the person whose role in your life already carries authority. During this window, insight often travels through ordinary channels, through the person you barely notice, through the coworker who usually keeps it light, through the relative who is never trying to be profound, through the stranger whose face you may never see again after that day is over. And that is precisely why it lands. When wisdom comes through expected places, the mind braces for it. It prepares, it measures, it filters. But when meaning slips through an ordinary exchange, it enters without resistance. Your defenses are down. Your intellect is not standing at the gate demanding credentials. You are just moving through the day, buying coffee, answering a text, half listening in a hallway, sitting in a rideshare, making small talk, and then suddenly a sentence cuts through the noise with impossible precision, not because it was delivered dramatically, but because it arrived at the exact second your life was ready to hear it. That is one of the hidden mechanics of this transit. Mercury governs language, timing, and the passage of information. Jupiter enlarges significance. Together, they can turn a casual remark into a key. A throwaway observation becomes a mirror. A joke carries more truth than a serious conversation you had 3 weeks ago. Someone says one simple thing about work, love, priorities, timing, money, distance, or your own behavior, and something in you goes still. The words may be ordinary, but the recognition is not. Pay attention when that happens. Do not dismiss the message because the messenger seems too random, too unqualified, too passing to matter. This transit is known for bypassing expectations so that meaning can arrive clean. It reaches you sideways. It comes in unannounced. It catches you before performance has time to assemble itself. That is why the insight can feel sharper than advice you actively went looking for. You were not trying to find an answer, so when it arrives, it enters deeper. Sometimes the comment will confirm what you already knew but had been avoiding. Sometimes it will name a truth you had only felt in fragments. Sometimes it will contradict the story you have been telling yourself, yet still carry the weight of something real. That is the sign. Real insight often does not flatter the current version of you. It interrupts it. It reveals the pressure point. It shows you the exact part of your life, asking to be reordered now. So stay alert in ordinary moments. Listen harder than usual. Notice which words echo after the conversation is over. Notice what keeps replaying in your mind long after it should have faded. During this passage, wisdom may not come dressed like wisdom. It may come disguised as coincidence, casual speech, or a passing encounter. But if it lands with force, receive it. The window is brief, and the signal is cleanest before the mind starts arguing with it. What reaches you now may look small on the surface, but it carries direction inside it. Honor that direction quickly, while the door is still open. If you are still here, still willing to listen beneath the noise, then hear this clearly. You do not need to wrestle meaning out of what is unfolding. You do not need to chase certainty, or force tomorrow to explain itself before its hour arrives. What is moving toward you is not in conversation with the self you already outgrew. It is answering the version of you now taking shape. So as this window opens, stay alert, but stay unforced. Watch what pulls at your attention. Watch what suddenly clarifies. Watch what feels charged, precise, and impossible to dismiss. Not everything will announce itself loudly. Some shifts enter like a change in atmosphere, a sentence that lands deeper than it should, a decision that arrives with unusual calm. Trust that. Respect it. Move when the signal is clean. There is more being arranged than you can measure from where you stand today. The next chapter is not empty space. It already carries provision, direction, and a hope strong enough to meet you on the way. Your task is to recognize it, answer it, and step forward when the door opens at last.